Okay, and the recording has begun. All right, Stacey, well, thank you again for joining us today. Real quick, if you would like to start by kind of going over kind of what the organization, what Breakaway does, and then maybe your role within the organization and sort of how you found yourself in that role.
Yeah, thank you, Connor. Thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited to talk to you all in this fresh new year. Our office is in Georgia, so we've had a pretty exciting couple of days with this last election, hopefully the last election. And yeah, so my name's Stacey. I'm the executive director of Breakaway. We're actually in our 30th year. This will be our 30th anniversary. And it started 30 years ago with students just like you all who did alternative breaks when they were in college and just saw that it was a program that had a lot of potential, but needed some structure and some support. So they started this organization to be that sort of central location of information for alternative break programs across the country. And that's what we've been doing for 30 years is connecting universities, programs, community partners, students, being a wealth of resources and knowledge and just sharing what you all are doing across that network. And we've always, our mission is to see a world in which we are all active citizens, but more than that, that we all do this service in a way that is truly great for communities, in a responsible way, in a way that is a learning opportunity for students, but also an empowering opportunity and experience for the communities that we work in. So we do a lot of workshops around racial justice, community, humility, how to set, like not just how to do a program and how to do a trip, but how to do it well and work with communities. So and my role here as now as executive director is to take us into the new future of alternative breaks and of service in general. We've been very good about helping programs figure out how to become aware of what the issues are in their communities. But I really want us to move into what do you do then? I want us to see us do more advocacy, more generally like getting to the communities and finding what they need. So my role is going to be getting us into that new future while all making, using the foundation of alternative break experience that we've had and really build something new and exciting out of that.
Awesome. Thanks, Stacey. Just in case some of our participants or attendees on this call aren't really familiar with the term, could you kind of explain a little bit more what active citizenship is and kind of how you see it in the alternative break context?
Yes, thank you. Active citizenship is an interesting term. It's one that we are constantly struggling with. It's what we've used over the last several decades to describe someone who is truly invested in their community, someone who thinks about their community and their life choices and in their values and their career choices. It's just being part of a community in a real and tangible way. The word citizen has been politicized and it's now a pretty heavy word. And it's truly not what we mean anymore. We don't mean people who are legally citizens of any nation. We mean people who choose to be part of their community. So it's a term that we're going to try hard to find a better way of saying. But the gist is someone who makes community a priority in their life is an active citizen.
Awesome. Thanks, Stacey. Appreciate you sharing that. Okay, so to get us started, so I don't want to focus completely on COVID, but I think it's an important piece of discussing, obviously what's happening right now. There's a reason we're doing a virtual break instead of traveling, but also, kind of how it impacts everything going forward, but this field specifically, a field that requires so much, is so based on travel and the impact of travel and kind of the disparate impacts of what that'll go from there. So what have been some major things that have changed for your work since the pandemic began, and what have you kind of been seeing, and what has shifted since it started?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this question the last few days as we start this new year. It kind of feels like everything changed and then very little changed. For Breakaway specifically, the biggest thing that we do, our summer conference, ABCs, has always been in person. It's always been a chance for folks from across the country to come together and connect and bond over their shared love of community and service. We had to do that all virtually. We couldn't do that in person, obviously. And all of our trainings have been virtual. And we're a very human contact kind of organization. And we were people who just love working with people. And so we had to take that all online. So that was a huge change for us. But the values of what we do didn't really change. We're still connecting with people. We're trying to have conversations. We're trying to share resources, share ideas, and just get ourselves through tough times. And working with communities is hard. And we've always leaned on each other to do that. We did last year is just talk to each other and figure out what was going on, how we could share resources. And it was more helpful than ever to be able to share resources, and so many programs were doing so many different things. We were able to connect folks through different ways and help them learn from each other. So a lot of what we do didn't change at all, but it also feels like a complete new reality. I think for alternative break programs specifically, obviously, is again, it feels to me like everything changed and then very little changed. Trips were no longer an option. So the idea of alternative break being a trip was off the table for most places. I think we've heard of a few programs that were able to do some kind of 1-2 day, very close by service under very strict protocols, but that's really the minority. Most programs just kind of stopped doing any trips altogether. But they started amping up the education, much like you all are doing this week. They started really thinking about these issues in a deeper way than they ever have before. They started reaching out to community members to say, what do you need? What can we do for you right now in this moment? And stopped thinking about what do I want to get out of this experience and really what can I do right now? And that's alternative break. Alternative break is finding a way to use what we have to make things better and to connect with communities. And so I think in a lot of ways we may have been able to connect with communities better because it took away that idea of just showing up and I need you to teach me something and I'm where's this and where's that, and more just what's the idea, what are we trying to do here, who's suffering, where can we get money, where can we start to fundraise for organizations, how can we think in new directions about these things that have been bugging us for years. So I think obviously so much changed, but the true spirit of doing service and connecting to community, it didn't change at all. It just got better, I think.
So I'm interested to hear you say that, and you kind of mentioned it in your opening speech as well, is talking about kind of the view of alternative breaks has often been that strong direct service piece. You're there, you're working at a food bank sorting food, or you're putting up a house, or you're, doing coastal restoration, things that are required direct hands-on work. And I think that's extremely valuable, but you've talked a little bit about that education piece and that advocacy piece and how those pieces can play. How do you think that programs can better integrate those things going forward and make those a core piece of the work that they're doing?
I think relying on, we all know that it's not good service unless it's been asked for, unless it's something that the community has said, this is a need. We know it's a need because we live in the community, because we've heard from folks. And this is how you fit in a way that's helpful. And that's tricky for alternative break and for service in general. It's always been hard for volunteers to fit into a community that might not necessarily be theirs. But we know that that's important and that's impactful. And so I think the direct service has always been tricky, again, because you want to show up there. You want to my background, I did alternative break in college many years ago, over 20 years ago now. And then I went into AmeriCorps and did City Year for a couple of years. So I've done a lot of direct service, and I get what people get out of it. And that, it's so important to be there and be doing the work, to meet people where they are, to feel that sense of accomplishment. But I think we need to take this opportunity to step back and think that is a good feeling when I show up and I'm able to, pick up trash from the river or paint a wall in a school or see folks that I'm serving food to. But am I sure that that's the right thing to do? Am I sure that that's what they actually need? It might be, but how long have we been assuming that that's the stuff that needs to happen without thinking about it, really considering it, and really educating ourselves on the issue? So going into a food kitchen, not just because you have a Saturday off and you want to do something nice and you want to do something that's helpful, but because you've studied food systems, you studied food deserts, you studied where poverty comes from, how easily it can affect folks. You've thought about what the pandemic did to people and who ended up at food kitchens that never thought they'd be there, what that community is like, all the things that go into knowing that community and what they need and who they are before you show up on that Saturday morning, so that when you are giving out food, you understand exactly who those people are and you're ready to make a commitment over a period of time, so that it's just not one and done, but you're there consistently and people can count on you. I think that's what we're going to get out of this. I think we're going to have a new definition of direct service, and it's not always going to be direct. It's going to be advocacy and fundraising on behalf of folks that don't necessarily always need you there, but they need you to be talking on behalf of them, and really, rattling the cages of folks that you have access to and they don't.
That's a great point. Thank you so much for sharing that. So another thing, so thinking about kind of how we're moving forward as we hopefully, progress towards some sense of normalcy, or not normalcy, kind of, whatever the new normal is going forward in the next few months and sort of start to resume operations. So I guess what is something that you've seen that's been a major success during this time that you think, hey, this is going to transfer out and we're going to be able to utilize it, or just something you've seen that's been overwhelmingly positive during a time that has been intensely difficult for a lot of people?
Well, first of all, this week that you all are doing is huge. You told us about this a few months ago, and we've since been, telling everybody, like, listen to what they're doing. It's really cool. It's such a great way to engage folks in that education and service. And so I really commend you on what you all put together. The other thing I'm really excited about, that some folks have been doing hometown service. So those students who are having to be in school from home, finding a way to serve in their community and then coming back together around a shared idea, a shared issue, I think is really important for now, obviously, because it gets us through a tough time. But I think in the future, students have this, when you're in college, you have this really interesting couple of years where you're in a new community of college students, you're perhaps in a new city altogether, but you also have the community that you came from, the community that you want to go to. There's so many different communities that you're part of. So to be able to serve one that's unique to you and unique to where you came from, and then be able to go to another one and discuss what you did and what the issue was and why you did it and why it connects to something bigger, I think is really huge. Having a group go together to do service has a lot of benefits to it, and I don't want to see that go away. But I'm excited that we're adding this new dimension of where you come from, how do you connect to the community that made you who you are, and how does that connect to a bigger issue that we all share. Food systems, for one, it's one that it's really important to me to figure out. It's something that I could think about in the community that I live in Georgia, but I could also, that connects to what people are doing across the country. So just these unique ways of serving, but also connecting it to the bigger idea, I think is what's going to help us crack some of these big systematic problems when we can do the service in our own community, but connect it to that bigger system-wide issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And having that sense of knowledge and being from the places that you're from, you've lived there most times, not everyone, and that's people moving. That's not always the case for everyone, but for a lot of people, they have that sense of knowledge of their community that they're from. And, like you mentioned, you go into a college community, but often you're only there 4 to 6 years, and it's not quite the same level of investment that you may have in a hometown community. So bringing that knowledge wherever you go can be so useful. So I guess you just started to touch on it, and feel free to keep expanding, but kind of then big philosophical question. What do you see as sort of the future for alternative breaks at universities? You touched on some of the pieces there, but what do you see long-term, 5, 10 years from now? What do you imagine that these programs are going to look like and how they're going to be functioning?
Well, I think, the value of alternative break, is the thing that we have to consider right now. I mean, I have a lot of big ideas and I'm really excited for the opportunities that are going to come out of this strange time. But we have to be honest with ourselves. A lot of programs are on the cutting board. Like they had small budgets to start with, and now those are getting cut. We were losing positions across the country. People are starting to, say like, why are we doing this? Why are we spending money on this? We have a more important thing to spend the money on. And I think that's the wrong way to go. I think that alternative break, and like remembering from my time in college 22 years ago and now, it's really the only opportunity that students have to take what they're learning and directly apply it to the real world, to the community. I mean, there's lots of projects that you can do to do that, but like with alternative break, you're setting up a whole project, you're meeting a community, you're working with folks who are working right now, you're finding ways to solve problems. You're doing everything that you're going to do in your career, no matter what your career is. By far, whatever your career is, you're going to do the things that you're doing in alternative break. And to connect it real time, like while you're in classes, while you're learning these things, and to be able to do it over a couple of years is so invaluable. And I don't think there's a lot of programs that do that. So I'm excited for those folks who are really fighting to keep it going. And that's you all. I mean, like finding creative ways of engaging and educating and doing virtual service, even if it doesn't feel like it's the sort of service that you want to do, or if it doesn't feel like it's really the same experience, that's okay. You're getting through this year and we're getting into the future so that we can get back to this wonderful program that allowed us to have that experience in the world. So I think the value needs to be reassessed. We need to rethink how we sell this to our administrations and to fellow students, how we actually use what we learn. We really need to come back to campus and be doing reflection and reorientation and thinking like, what did you really get out of that? And how are you going to move that forward? It's not just a way to spend spring break. It's not just a way to spend a weekend. It's truly how to start to learn how to be in the world and be a force for good and someone who makes things happen. And if we treat it that way, I think it will continue to build that value, and we'll be able to get more people on board. So, and I'm kind of glad to see the trip part just not be the highlight. Like, we're gonna go back on trips, we're gonna go into the world and travel together and have those experiences, but it's not why we do alternative break. It's just not. We do it so we can connect with the communities, we can find out what's going on in the world, that we can find out how to fix it, we can learn. This is a service learning program. We are so fortunate the community partners take their time to teach us about the world through their service and through their work. And we're so fortunate that communities allow us to be there to see what's going on. We're not there to fix their problems or we're not there to give to them. We're really there to get from those community partners. And that's what I'm most excited about. So just the different ways that folks are doing more to educate themselves and doing more advocacy. I think a lot of us go into this work and realize, oh, like these communities have what they need. They're just being beaten up from every angle. Like, what can I do to make sure that stops happening? And how can I vote? Where can I put my money? Like, who can I talk to make sure that we lift the barriers that are keeping perfectly thriving communities from getting to where they want to go? So the future of alternative break is just to keep growing and get more folks on board with taking those couple of years in college to figure out not only like, what are you going to do and who are you going to be, but like, how are you going to be part of this? Like, how are you going to be part of this community and this structure? So that's what, there's tons of ways to do that, but I think that the core of it is that has to be the future.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think you have a really good point there. And I think thinking about it from I think sometimes we think about reorientation is you're bringing the lessons back from wherever you're coming from and you're putting them into your community, which, yes, I believe is a big part of reorientation, or the community that you're currently residing in. But I think a big part of it too is staying connected to those communities. Like, it always warms my heart when someone's like, hey, I'm going to go volunteer back there. Or like, I get a message from a community partner like, hey, we had these 2 people who went on this trip who came back and served this entire time. And remembering now that you're connected to this community too, And so continuing to support that community and the causes that that community is working towards, because all of those things are interwoven together. I think that's really huge. Question in the Q&A, let me pull it up. This is Michael Murray. Hi, Michael. He says, there are many service opportunities locally, and because we will not travel for a service opportunity now, how do we do service locally, and service locally maybe better even, and how do we do it best virtually as well?
I mean, first thing always is just to ask, what do you need right now? What can we do for you? Community partners are strapped, they're busy, they're doing the work, but I think, and I've worked for a lot of nonprofits over the years. I don't think I could ever get tired of hearing someone ask, hey, what can I do? I'm here, what can I do? And if the answer at first might be like, I don't know, give me a minute. But eventually it's gonna be like, you just like hand out these flyers so people know that this health fair is happening on Saturday. I can't do it, but like it really needs to happen. And you can just be like, yep, I'm ready to go. And if you know the community, if you know that partner, if you know the issues they're facing, someone can just hand you something to do and you can go do it. The hard part about having volunteers as a community partner is when people just show up and they're like, I have today and I really want to do something. You're welcome. Where can I go? And it's like, no, thank you. But if you've like contacted that organization, if you know why they're there, if you know what community they're truly serving, if you kind of like give it a little of time and commitment, it's so helpful to communities just to have people who are like, I'm ready to do literally whatever you need, even if it's not flashy. But through doing, you might go pass out flyers, and I guess it's not really something we do these days, maybe with masks, but like if you're passing out flyers on a Saturday to get them out to a community fair, you're like meeting these people where they are, they're getting a sense of what they struggle with. You're gonna go to that community fair and you're gonna see the same folks that you got to come out there, and it's gonna be so a connection of like, hey, so even something as small as like, what can I do here, do this legwork is gonna get you into that community, and you're gonna start to understand the value of them being there, and they're gonna understand the value of you being there. And I think just showing up and being ready to do the small things is how we keep this going. Virtually is also really interesting. And you guys are doing some virtual service, which I think is great. We did some this summer on ABCs. We're going to do more next summer. It's tough because, let's be honest, like virtual is not how we live. And so like finding how to be a community virtually is not going to happen overnight, but it's so great that we're showing up and saying, we're going to do it however it works for you. What do you need? And there's some cool things that can happen virtually. And a lot of it is advocacy, can I just write letters all day to senators and ask them for specific funding? Or can we help you with your social media? Like, can we help you with your Zoom? Like, whatever it is, it's the need that is now. And so when you step up to offer to address the need that is like happening right now, that's amazing. And I'm so grateful that you all are doing that. I'm excited to see what you learn, because when you graduate this year or next year, this is the world now. I mean, this is we're going to go back to something like what was before, but we're also going to have more virtual organizations, more virtual work, more virtual advocacy. So you're starting the work now to understand what folks are going to need in the next few years. I think that's really important.
Awesome, thanks. So I like the point that you continue to make about advocacy. And so I think that's a great point, but I think some people might struggle with how to do it. How do you be an advocate? So what are some of your thoughts or advice on how people can be better advocates, what they should be learning, what skills they should be trying to gain? And then what are some like concrete ways, like you mentioned, like writing letters or something like that they can practice that advocacy?
Yeah, it's certainly not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not something that you can just, do on a Saturday. It's going back to the educating yourself on a specific topic, learning about the organizations that are working in that issue area, what those community folks are really struggling with, what's the root of that problem. So it's really the education piece, and then finding out where your circle of influence is. Really examining yourself, what you bring to the table, what is your identity, what is your race, ethnicity, orientation, what do you affect, and being able to take inventory of those things, put the education together, and knowing what your influence is and what you can do, then you can start to put that together and say, you know what, I know some folks who could be donating more, and I know that they care about an issue, and now I've learned about that issue. I think I can get those folks together. Or I know that if I have time to write to politicians and elected officials, so I'm just gonna pick an official and write a letter as often as possible until I hear from them about how they're going to address this issue. And then of course, also just asking those organizations, after you really understand what they do and what their community looks like and struggles with, saying to them, look, I've got time, I've got social media, and I have a network. Like, what can I do with that? And a lot of times they'll be able to say, like, hey, like, put up this specific message over and over and over again. Be really clear that this is, I mean, defunding police is probably a good example, right? Because it's such a tricky issue, and it can be inflammatory in some ways, but it's important to think about the bedrock of what that is. There's something really important to the foundations of that issue. If you understand it really well, if you do the reading, if you ask people questions, if you really get what people are trying to say, you can have that conversation better with somebody who just hears the words and is like, that's crazy, we're not doing it, that scares me, and say, actually, hold on, let's have a conversation, because it scared me too. But then if you look into it, this is what it really is. So again, the education piece, and then knowing who you can talk to and you have access to. It's not just, talking to your uncle at Thanksgiving. I as a white person, I understand that's can sometimes feel like a wall, like, oh, that's not going to happen. But if I understand these issues really, really well, then when I'm talking to my dad about something innocuous, I can just sort of like slip some stuff in a way that he can really hear. And it's small, but that is advocacy. That is advocating for folks who do not get heard by people who are in majority positions and in positions of power. So while that's not, and unfortunately it's not kind of a clean cut, like, here are some things you could do, it's a longer process, but we have the time. So let's start doing it now.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just a reminder to everyone in the audience, if you have any questions, we have a couple questions left, but if you have any questions, make sure to ask them in the Q&A. But I did want to touch upon a point you just made there, and that's the topic of identity, and specifically race, especially. This has traditionally been a difficult spot in a lot of alternative break, like traditionally, because it's been, a lot of the students who are going in to serve are often identify as white, and then they're going in to serve with primarily communities of color. And this applies to other identities as well. So I think sometimes we get into these talks about power, privilege, and oppression and all that, which is really important, but sometimes can get people a little bit lost on how they can actually find the way to be understand their identity and how it interacts with the others in the world. So how do you think people can best go about some of that sort of understanding their identity and its interactions with the identities of others, and practicing sort of that allyship advocacy piece?
Yeah, I think it starts with humility. Honestly, it starts with going to these communities without much to say. I mean, I think the thing that we need to learn as folks who are privileged enough to have an education, to have the time to serve. I mean, the thing that I've learned over years is just a lot of times there's a lot of white people there because we have the luxury of jobs that'll let us, take a few hours off, or just not needing to work two jobs in order to take care of things. There's a whole host of reasons why white folks are often in situations where they can actually do more service. And it's all due to structural racism. So we still have to do the service. I mean, there's a lot of times where I've been like, maybe I just shouldn't be doing this. But that's not the answer, because then I'm not a good community member, right? Then I'm just feeding off the community. I'm not giving anything back. So I still need to show up. I still need to do the work. But I find that when I do it with a sense of I'm just here to learn and do what I'm asked, just truly what can I do? And no task is too small. I'll do whatever you need. Starting that way, at least will get us on the road to eventually understanding. And it really has to be consistency and commitment to a specific issue or a specific organization. And I know that's hard when you're in school and you're young, and especially with alternative break, you kind of want to do new stuff every year and you want to learn new things, and there's so much going on. But if you can commit to even just like one organization over time, you're going to learn who those folks are. You're going to learn who the community members that you're serving with and for are. You're going to learn who they are. And, just like in relationships and other situations in which race is there, it starts to break down as we understand each other and we talk to each other and we're willing to ask questions and make mistakes. And, if you wanted to be friends with somebody who was a different ethnicity orientation from you, that you would just learn who they are over time, and you'd make mistakes. And sometimes they'd have to say, yo, whatever. But over time, you would learn what that specific person needs and how you can be a good friend to them. And it's the same thing with community members, community partners. It's everything, right? It's just taking time to find out what those specific individuals need and how you can be supportive in a respectful way, and understanding that a lot of times they don't need you. They're being blocked by something. There's barriers being put in their way that is unfair, and it's not because anything that had to do with them. It's just, it's society, it's structures. So a lot of times you can just maybe try to get that barrier out of the way so they can live their full lives as they should. So just like seeing these issues in communities on an individual basis, understanding that it's not one big glob of humanity. It's individual people who need support in very different ways. And if you can find those folks that you can help with your specific talents and unique abilities, those are the connections that we need to make to connect over things other than race.
Thank you. Very well said. Okay, I've got one more question in the Q&A. So another one from Michael. So one of the great takeaways from trips is the bond of the participants and how the participants learn from and about one another. It's a great way to grow as a human. How can we do this in today's world, especially virtually?
I don't know, Michael. I am trying to figure that out. So I took this job in March of last year. I was actually in New Orleans at the time. I took the job, and like a few days later, we were all quarantined. So my staff and I, we're on Zoom all day long, every day. I've really only been in the same room with them a handful of times. So I'm constantly thinking every day about like, how am I going to get this staff to bond? How can I get to know these folks virtually? And I hate it. It's not the same. But I've been finding over time, it starts to happen. I'm starting to see people in this little box, but I'm starting to understand their inflections, how they talk, like what's behind them, like what clothes they wear, little things that you maybe wouldn't have noticed when you're in person. And those are the things that help us connect as people. That's the things that we get used to and we start to love, and we start to miss when it's not around. So it's maybe just going to take a little longer. Alternative break for me, I'll never forget it. I made some of my best friends in the world in a couple of days. It was crazy. I remember the reason I loved alternative break so much was like, I have never experienced becoming friends with somebody so quickly over something that really mattered to us. And we're still really, really close friends. Virtually, we're not going to do that. Virtually, we're not going to make it in a week. But over time, we start to learn things about each other that maybe we wouldn't have paid attention to. So I think let's just have a little faith in this medium and give it some time. What does that look like for alternative break? I think it looks like getting folks in earlier in the year, and just even when your school schedule is tough, even when a lot's going on, you're exhausted, you don't want to do Zoom, trying to get in a meeting every week if you can, or every other week, trying to get in an article reading, or just discussing what's going on in the news, just something to keep it going. And then over time, I think we're going to get to know each other, and we're going to bond over caring about the world and caring about people and wanting to do better. We're going to bond over it. it's just going to take a little bit longer. But in the end, those are the relationships that truly last forever and mean so much more, because you didn't connect over just like, I happen to be in a class with you. You connected over like, I care about what's happening. I'm scared about what's happening. I want to make things better. I want to see people do better. I want to eradicate poverty and things that aren't good for communities. You bond with somebody over that, and you've got a lifetime friend. I think virtually we just have to give it time and try and just be committed to making it happen. Be more intentional and thoughtful, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Is you really got to, more than ever, you have to put the effort in, which isn't always easy, because sometimes you're staring at that screen and you're like, I can't even see anyone anymore, but it's definitely something that's there. Another question is, what is kind of like a resource, so like an article or a podcast or something you'd recommend for folks during this time, either focused kind of on service and like active citizenship and social change, or just something you found helpful as like a human being?
Goodness. Well, okay, so this is just like personally, this is what helps get me through. I love comedy. I've done a lot of comedy in my days, and so I love comedians. And Tig Notaro is one of my favorite comedians. And she actually just had a podcast today. Her podcast is called Don't Ask Tig. It's basically an advice podcast, but she says she's terrible at advice. Like, don't ask her, but she does it anyway. And she had a guest on today, Jamila Jamil, or Jamil. I never get her name right. Anyway, the podcast that came out today, they were both brilliant, and they both just like blew away my ideas about, what it means to just stick up for yourself and care for yourself, and like really like fight for what you need and what your community needs. And she has a podcast now called I Weigh, like WEIGH, that I'm now going to listen to all the time, because she's just an extraordinary person to listen to and get really excited about being an advocate for ourselves and for the people in our community. So that one was just a lot of fun. But I love podcasts. One of the ones that I listen to a lot, which is kind of ending, but the Ezra Klein podcast is a really good one for like long form, issue-based discussions. So you can go back and get a lot of the back catalog. A lot of that helps me really think through some of these issues. And if I take the dog for a walk and go and listen to one of these long podcasts, even if I'm only getting half of it, it really helps me think about like, what are some possibilities? What are some, what's going to happen? And like, how can we start to like really connect over these issues? And any podcast for me that's just like a long discussion of an issue, even if it's kind of boring sometimes, or if I'm going in and out of it, like I just need to dive into these issues. I need to educate myself all the time, every day, deeper and deeper and deeper into these issues, because as I do, it unfolds over and over and over again, and I start to get ideas and I start to understand what's actually happening, so that when it is my time to serve, I'm going to be ready.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. I definitely feel you on that. I've been listening to podcasts all over the place, so definitely understand.
Yeah.
All right. Well, seeing no more questions in the Q&A, the last question I have for you then, classic last question. What is one piece of advice that you would leave for our participants that to going forward during this time and beyond regarding either active citizenship, social change, or just in general?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. Just be patient with yourself. Just take time. We're not going to solve these issues overnight. If we could, then they weren't they weren't an issue, right? It's a lifetime of building community and being part of the solution, and it's being part of the solution in everything you do, and the job you choose, and the place you decide to live, and the partner that you end up with, the family you create. So it's not just like, can I do some service? Can I give back to the community and then move on? It's how can you learn about what's going on? How can you understand? How can you hear and listen to the folks who are affected by these issues, so that you can spend the rest of your life being the kind of person that advocates for those folks and gives when you can, and talks about the issue and keeps listening, because it's going to change. It's going to change over your lifetime. And so you'll have to change with it. But just in general, be patient with yourself. If I could go back to myself 20 something years ago and just say, hey, just calm down, be patient, it's going to happen. That's what I'm finally learning now, is that if I can just kind of give myself a break and realize that it's a long-term goal. It's a lifetime of trying to do this. I could have saved myself some grief in my 20s. But in general, just keep at it. It's more important that you don't burn out and that you keep doing this the rest of your life than to get super involved right now and it's all you think about and all you do. Make it integrated into your life. Do it for the rest of your life. That's what we need. We need a world of folks who are doing this all the time so that we don't have these issues in 100 years, so that we just have people who are trying to work together to make this work for everybody.
Awesome. That's wonderful advice. Thank you, Stacey. All right. Well, that concludes our session for today. Thank you so much, Stacey, for taking time out of your day to come and join us. I really enjoyed getting to chat with you, and hopefully our participants and those who joined for the session today took some out of it as well. And thank you to all those who attended. The webinar has been recorded, so we'll be getting that posted in probably the next week or so. So if you want to rewatch it or you want to share it with anyone, feel free to do that. It'll be posted on the Buck-I-SERV website. For those participating in the virtual Buck-I-SERV, up next is your virtual service. So your leaders will guide you through what that is going to look like. Most of you are working with one of our community partners. If not, again, remember in that packet, there are a number of different service options and options to find virtual service as well. So thank you all. And thanks again, Stacey.
Thank you so much. Really
have a great rest of your day. And for those participating in the virtual Buck-I-SERV, have a great rest of your Wednesday for Buck-I-SERV. Thank you all.
Enjoy your service. Thanks, y'all.
Bye.